being the nature of Lego, most of your scenes were incredibly complex. Were there other techniques apart from the shallow depth of field to sort of direct the viewer's attention? Yes, I mean, lighting definitely, and we've been doing some marketing material for Lego since then, since the movie was released, and there's one shot in particular that was almost, well, it was just very hard to see what was going on, and lighting did an incredible job, and the colorists to push the background away and to bring our characters forward. Stereo techniques, I showed in quite a few of the stereo reviews as they were setting the stereo plane, and they used that to great advantage to you know, put the character's main action right at exactly the plane where it was most comfortable to view, and everything else fell away from that or was in front of that. Any other techniques? Nothing that comes to mind. I might have to, I'll come back to that one. Spoiler alert to anyone who hasn't seen. Was the choice to have moments which were puppeted something you wanted to foreshadow the whole child playing the entire story, and were these type of shots rotoscoped? Well, yes. You know, as I said with the Vitruvius, I don't know if the guys actually rotoscoped that footage, but they got pretty close with the reference footage. And yes, I guess that was to foreshadow the idea that it was a kid's. The whole thing was being made by the little boy and his father's Flynn in his father's basement. And what was your favourite animation technique for Lego? This is from Pearl. Did you prefer stop motion with not much use of the computer? There's only actually a few. I think the only stop motion in the finished feature is the credit sequence at the end. I'm pretty sure we didn't use any other stop motion at all, actually, which is, I mean, it's great that you should say that because it means we've done our job properly. And now for the cars, was the brick blur used on them, or was it traditional motion blur? Do you know, as far as I know, the cars, all the car sequences, I don't think there is any motion blur on them at all. I'd love to be corrected, but I think the decision was made not to blur them. But look, I wouldn't like to weigh in on that argument because I probably don't know enough about how they were rendered. We certainly saw them without motion blur, so we animated them as if there wasn't going to be motion blur. Other questions. Did the rig allow for a lot of facial animation? In which manner did you deal with the faces that look painted on? That's going to be my next point. If you go to, actually I'll show you here. One of the time-honoured techniques of stop-motion animation is replacement faces and replacement mouths, and you know, I've worked with that technique before. You're probably all familiar with the you know, the behind-the-scenes material from shows like Paranorman and Nightmare Before Christmas, where you'd see great boxes of replacement faces with every possible lip sync shape sculpted in, every possible face shape sculpted in. We have here, we ended up with something similar. We decided to go with trying to imitate the idea that we were doing replacement sticker animation, that we had a sheet of stickers, and that was the limits of our face animation, and you'd pull a sticker off, stick it on, take a few frames, pull the sticker off, and then pop on a smile. So it would be very poppy and very not rudimentary, because the original artwork was carefully calibrated to you know, allow accurate lip sync, but yeah, it would look like a stop motion sticker replacement technique. But on top of that, so we have a little library here. I can show you. So you can see all Emmett's different face shapes there. So we'd be able to click on any one of those shapes, and it would drop down onto the face and appear as a texture in our scene. But on top of that, for the more subtle scenes, especially the emotional ones, we definitely wanted to be able to manipulate these shapes in our scenes. So the rigging department provided a terrific manipulation rig that would allow us to, you could sculpt your own shape from scratch, or you could take these ones and adapt them as required by the shot. So every animator that came on the show had a chance for the first 2 weeks, while they're getting used to the rigs, to just have a play, like grab what they thought might be a fun character and do a little audition, you know, without many restrictions or parameters, and that gave rise to a lot of our really good stuff, like, you know, like the way the characters moved, like the way the brick blur would work, and that was all. That wasn't top-down stuff. It was coming from the artists mainly. I mean, that's what I believe, anyway. There was quite a few gags that came up in that process that ended up being used in the movie, like the way Bad Cop kicks the chair all the time when he's angry. That came from an animation test done by Mike Cotty, and featured very heavily in his performance in the movie. So the ways that we try and keep this communication going between the artists and the directors was obviously, you know, daily reviews with the directors as much as we could, particularly with Chris McKay. We relied heavily on the blocking pass as a testing ground, so we encouraged the animators to quickly put their ideas down in a very rough form, and we'd show that very early to get a sense of if the scene was heading in the right direction, if their ideas were funny, were good, you know, before going into the finesse stage. And that blocking pass would go all the way up to the DU, to the director's unit, Chris and Phil, who were mainly working from LA. And I think a lot of good stuff came out of that process, that people felt confident to try something, and if it was wrong they could try it again and still not try a different way and not have burned up all their time on the shot. So the blocking pass is a very important part of that. Also, we tried to have a two-way pipe, and this is unusual in productions I've worked on, where in some sequences, particularly action ones like the freeway chase and the alleyway scene where Lucy builds the bike for the first time, the animation department was encouraged to create whole animatics, you know, with camera, sound effects, action animation, assembly animation, and just quickly rough something out, and then we'd pass that down to edit and to layout, and they'd work on it and adjust, and then it'd come back to us and we'd work it on a little bit, and then it would go back to edit. So we, on some sequences, not all, we'd have a kind of circular process until we ended up with the final solution to the storytelling problems. We had lots of Lego lying around, like in the studio. Everyone had a minifig or two and a few bricks on their desk, and that was a lot of fun. We had a stop-motion room, a camera set up, and a little capturing computer that people could test out their ideas before they went into their scenes in XSI. And one of the great tools that came in about halfway through the production was the shot dressing tool, which allowed animators to grab any brick from the Lego library and bring it into their scene and animate it as they liked, and you know, they didn't have to refer back to art department or rigging, or it was instantaneous, and that created a lot of beautiful animation, I think, and especially the effects animation and motion blur, you know, brick blur, and some really funny stuff. So I think that tool was kind of instrumental in satisfying the creative brief that we've been given, because if you're working at home or in your garage making a short film, you know, you can't resort to a whole bunch of people to help you. You've just got to grab a bit of sticky tape, grab a bit of blue tack, or it's, you know, sticky wax, as Chris McKay always said, you know, a stick, and a bit of string and make the frame work for you to tell what you're trying to get across, the idea you're trying to convey. And that was something we were really trying to replicate in our workflow in the computer. Scenes involving complicated interaction with props, especially the scene where all of the team comes together to build the submarine. Were these scenes hand animated manually, or did you have special tools to assist in helping assemble the bricks? It depends on which scene you're talking about. Some of the assembly work is done by effects. A lot of it was done painstakingly by hand. Rigging would provide us with a rig that was just all the bricks with a control on each brick, and then we were able to combine the bricks into however we wanted to make our own mini rigs. That was actually one of the difficult things at the start of the show, was how are they going to assemble these things. And the directors had always said that they wanted, in earlier Lego projects like stuff for TV and DVD, there was a lot of kind of magical assembly, which looks great. You know, the characters would kind of hold their hands up and wave them and concentrate. It was kind of using the force, and the bricks would all assemble themselves in the background. But Chris and Phil and Chris McKay were all adamant that they wanted to see the bricks going on bricks, being held by hand, and actually, see how these things were made, because it was more immediate and it, aligned with Lego's philosophy about their toy. So wherever we could, we had to show characters picking up bricks and joining them together, and we had about 20 frames to assemble a whole spaceship, which is hilarious. We did a lot of stuff with there's a few shots, I think, where there's multiple characters flying around, putting bricks on. That was one way to get around it. The other way was to cut around the problem, show a few close-ups of bricks going together, and then a few close-ups of chunks going together, and then bang, there's the finished thing, which is kind of what we did in the alleyway.